Hi, everybody who's tuned in today. Welcome to today's webinar run by M+H Advisor in partnership with Tricolor Associates. I'm Sarah Bowen. I'm the chair of the webinar today. And we also have on the line Sarah Dowd, Director of Tricolor Associates. Sarah, would you like to say hello?
Hi there, everyone. I hope that you're hearing us all well, and look forward to spending the next 45 minutes with you.
So just a couple of housekeeping. If anyone is having any problems, don't worry about it. We understand that technical issues do arise, and we will be making this recording available to everyone after the session today. Once you've subscribed and registered like you have, you'll receive an email from us letting you know where you can access that recording. If you do have any questions, I'd just like to draw your attention to the speech bubble on the right-hand side in your control panel. You can send us questions there. We'll pick those up at the end and we'll try and answer as many of them as possible. If there are questions that you have that you couldn't think of during this session, you can email them to us afterwards. I'm sure Sarah will be more than happy to work through them if she can, and we'll try and consolidate them and perhaps run something on Advisor to cover any of the questions that you guys have that we haven't answered today. So without further ado, I'd just like to pass over to Sarah and she can start running through the presentation today. So Sarah, if you'd like to take over from me, I'll just do the magic of sharing my screen to yours, if that's okay, Sarah.
Excellent. If you could just tell me when you can see my screen, that would be fantastic.
Excellent. I've just shared yours now and it looks like it's just doing its thing.
We go.
There we go. I can see your screen now, Sarah.
Great. Thank you very much, Sarah. So, hi, everybody. I just really wanted to say thank you very much for joining us today. I, more than anyone, know what it means to take a precious half an hour, 45 minutes out of your day. And I really hope that what we can talk about today is informative. It's also quite an informal approach as well. So please do feel free to get in contact afterwards if you want to talk more. If you do have to leave early, don't worry about that as well. We are recording the session and I'm happy to share my slides with you. So without much ado, today's session is all about the National Lottery Heritage Fund, ? Who are they, what's happened, and how you can make this work for your organization and audiences. So today's purpose, I just want to make sure I get my slides working properly here. And sorry, I'm having a bit of a, oh, there we go. Today's purpose is to talk you through some of the major changes that's been happening. But more importantly, I don't want to talk on behalf of the funder. I am a National Lottery Heritage Fund consultant. They're formerly called Mentors and Monitors, and that's for public engagement and business planning. But the one overarching principle I tell all of my clients and inquiries is that I can give you sound and sensible advice based upon my experience, but nothing replaces talking to the funder themselves. So absolutely take what you learn here today. That's great. Put your own spin on it. Perfect. But always talk to the funder. That's the number one rule. So let me tell you a little bit about Tricolor. Tricolor was founded in 2009. We have worked on 62 different National Lottery Heritage funded projects since 2013. So as you can say, I've been a bit busy, and we've helped to raise over 107 million pounds of funding from the fund, and we have a 100% track record. I'm very proud of that. We have 35 consultants working around the country, including 3 former National Lottery Heritage Fund senior grants officers. We think that we're different because we really put people at the focus of everything we do. Our sort of ethos and sort of mission statement is changing people's futures through the past. And we do that through 3 different things. We do that through developing organizations, developing projects, and developing experiences. And what that means is that for developing organizations, we can assist in evaluation, social value, social return on investment analysis, theory of change, master planning, resilience building, operational management, and management consultancy. And we also develop projects including options appraisals, market assessments, visitor experience design, and then in terms of developing and delivering projects, we undertake interpretation planning, experience planning, and activity and learning plans as well. So that's a little bit about Tricolor. Again, I can more than happy to just point you in direction of our website. I don't want to spend too much time on this. As you can tell, I'm not originally from around here. I am from Toronto. I moved to the UK in 2002. I've been working in heritage and actually I've got a bit of a mixed bag background. I used to work for the Imperial War Museum, but I've also headed up advocacy charities. I've worked in the construction sector as well as at local authorities. So a bit of a mixed bag, but actually it was sort of the perfect experience to bring to the table when starting to focus on heritage work first and foremost. So moving on, let me just make sure this moves on correctly. There we go. Over there, finally. So yes, changing people's futures through the past. And I'll come back to this a little bit later because I actually think this is a mantra that's very closely aligned with where the funder is going over the next 5 years. And we'll talk a little bit more about that as we go forward. So we've already talked about not believing just me, but going directly to the horse's mouth. And one of the things that I want to do today is, while sharing with you some of my knowledge base of the changes going on, is actually doing a little bit of quick analysis and consideration as to what that might mean in order for you to develop a more successful application. So first and foremost, Strategic Framework 5, or which is sort of some of us refer to it. It's the fifth strategic funding framework from the formerly Heritage Lottery Fund, and it's actually a vast change in terms of how the funder is looking to work, but also how the funder is trying to position itself in the marketplace. The biggest change, I think, is summed up in their quote, which is they want to inspire, lead, and resource the UK's heritage and create a positive and lasting change for people and communities. So what that says to me is that, first and foremost, traditionally, the funder tended to be a more passive funder. If you've done projects in the past, could sometimes be considered a bit risk averse. I think that as a result of the extensive consultation that the funder's done, over 13,000 people, they have really listened to what people want from the organization and want it to become more of a positive and proactive organization that is making a difference, actually having an opinion, and is really standing up for heritage and all the wonderful things that heritage can do for people and communities. So it's looking to have more of a voice, in my opinion. And I think that's something that we ought to really bear in mind when looking at developing our projects. About what is your project saying? What difference is it really making? And how can it be something that the funder can point to and say, that project embodies our whole new way of working? So what are some of the biggest changes? The biggest changes are, as I mentioned, the more proactive approach. The campaigns and advocacy approach is something that is very different than has been in the past. There's also changes to the decision-making for grants. It's becoming much more localized. The committees within the areas, because the regions are changing, are actually going to have say over all grant applications up to 5 million. So your project is going to be considered alongside the other projects within your region. We can come on to £5 million plus projects a little bit later. But as a result of the consultation that the funder undertook, it really came up with two main priorities. It was that it wanted to focus on community heritage and natural heritage, and I'll talk a little bit more about this in a second. And it wanted to make sure that everyone is able to enjoy heritage, and I think that final point there is one of the biggest things we need to focus on as applicants over the next 5 years. But of course, the first thing that they are looking for is what heritage is at risk. And heritage at risk is being defined as decaying or neglected physical sites, those that are at risk of financial insecurity, intangible heritage and cultural practices that may be lost over time, habitats and species in decline, or heritage that is designated at risk. Okay, so let me move on to the next slide. So, nature and community. Nature and community are the two key areas that it is looking at. It is not the sole areas that we're looking at, and I think that you need to understand that these are very quite wide definitions of nature and community. It's important that when considering nature, for example, is that we're not just talking about parks or landscapes or natural heritage. What the funder is trying to do is to look at, if you are developing a new museum, how your project is going to benefit nature, how it's going to look at things like increasing biodiversity, looking at natural drainage, increasing tree planting. So it is not saying it's not funding building projects, restoration, capital works projects. What it's saying is that as a key element of the program is that we need to be doing much, much more to reduce our impact as a society on nature. So I think it's really important that when you're developing your projects is that actually incorporate nature and people's appreciation of what is going on in your natural environment. Incorporate that as part of your consultation. Start to build that in from the beginning. I would recommend looking for potential partners, such as architects or project managers who have experience in environmental works, who can bring a knowledge to the table to help you with this. The funder is looking to encourage conservation projects at a landscape scale, and they are interested in looking at sort of things on a wider area impact scale. They have found from their research and reviews that those projects that are coming together across an area, so not just individual organizations, are actually managing to achieve more of their outcomes across the piece. In terms of community, what do we mean by community? Community, well, there's two aspects to this. It's actually, what do people really value within your community? What is the heritage that they are really looking at developing, and how are you responding to that? So it's really, really important that we are looking at what the people are within your audiences, but also, and more importantly, and we'll come on to this in a second, the people who are not actively engaging with heritage, what they are saying about the heritage that they value. The funders come up with some really fantastic new grant funding levels that really enable communities to be more involved, including a community grant scheme that will allow you as individuals, individual organizations, projects to actually disperse some funding to other community or organizational groups within your area to help widen that the outcomes of what you're doing. I won't go into too much detail about that. But there's only one outcome now in the new framework that is the absolutely mandatory outcome, and that is we must reach a wider range of people. And this is focused on deprivation. This is focused on those people who traditionally have not been represented well within the sector. Um, I would challenge anyone who's listening to this who either works with heritage clients or is representative of a heritage organization themselves to reflect on how well their own organization reflects the diversity of our country. And this is something that we're very keen to look at. So some of the key people who are traditionally underrepresented in heritage are disabled people, young people, people from minority and LGBT plus communities, and people from lower socioeconomic backgrounds. So my advice to you when developing any project is no matter whether you are in Kensington and Chelsea or whether you're in St. Helens, start with the need within your community. Start with what is out there that actually needs to change for people. And then start considering how your project can help to make those outcomes happen. Another recommendation I would say is start building partnerships early. I cannot tell you how many projects I have seen that are, in development phase, and they're the partnerships that had been, quoted are actually, based upon one email or a phone call 3 years prior. And it is very difficult in a development phase of 2 years to develop meaningful partnerships that actually take into account the needs of those organizations you want to partner with. The funder's ability to offer now the community grant option so that your partners can take advantage of that is an incredible advantage now. But start with your partners, talk to them about the needs within the community, start working with them who are already working with people with disadvantaged backgrounds, and this is where you're going to start to build a project that isn't about right, we have some major capital repair works to undertake, which is natural, but actually focuses on how do we meet these genuine outcomes and change people's futures, whilst at the same time facilitating that through our buildings and landscapes and sort of intangible heritage. And as a result, the capital works needs that you might have are completed, but what you are committing to is actually a whole new way of working with these different audiences. Right, I'm keenly aware of time, so I wanted to talk a little bit about the geographic changes. As you might all be aware, the funder has always had different geographic priority areas. The new areas for this framework are based upon key areas that have not had a lot of funding from the National Lottery Heritage Fund in the past, but are also representative of areas with high levels of deprivation. Those are Brent, Enfield and Newham in London, Corby in Northamptonshire, Knowsley in Merseyside, Inverclyde and North Lanarkshire, Neath, Port Talbot, and I apologize, I do not speak Welsh, nor is my pronunciation going to be correct. So any of our Welsh colleagues on the phone, you're going to laugh at me. So I'm just going to say Rhondda Cynon Taf in Wales, and you can get a good laugh. Luton in Bedfordshire, Northeast Lincolnshire, Tendring in Essex, and Walsall in the West Midlands. So moving on, we want to be looking at what are some of the new campaigns and investments that the funder is looking at. This also goes back to what we were saying earlier about the changes in sort of attitude, in mission that the funder is looking at. And one of the big things is, as I mentioned earlier, it's looking at landscapes and area-based projects. So, I do encourage you to start working through those partnerships, start working, with the local authority, or if you're the local authority, looking at community-based partners that can support the project, and really looking at how you can genuinely achieve change by partnering with those organizations who are already working very closely and interactively with those key target audiences. In terms of campaigns, what does the funder mean by that? Well, essentially, they're going to be looking at specific areas of interest of which they are going to launch campaigns about. Some of them might follow up being dynamic collections. They might be looking at digital. They're going to be looking at, research and advocacy as well. So they want to actually be forward and proactive in stimulating those innovation, creating opportunities for people to develop new debates, have new dialogues, and bring in new sources of expertise throughout the project, their projects. Right, next slide. The community grant scheme, I talked a little bit more about that in detail earlier. Some examples might be they don't believe that the community grant scheme should exceed £200,000, but some of the guidelines that they've given is that you might be looking at, as part of the project, delivering activity grants to other community partners that might be valued between £250,000 and £10,000. You might also be looking at providing small capital grants between the ranges of £250,000 and £25,000. And the reason they're looking at this is because, the traditional targeted programs such as the Landscape Partnership Scheme, Townscape Heritage are no longer going to feature as separate funding initiatives. And that's one of the biggest changes of the whole program, is the fact that whilst before we were competing almost with sort of apples and oranges, if you're looking at the Great Places of Worship scheme or Parks for People, it's one park in comparison to another park. So what was apples and oranges is now actually becoming what I call apples and bricks. And being able to compare apples and bricks is a very, very difficult thing to do, except if actually what you're focusing on is the change, the outcomes, the difference that apple is going to create for people versus what that brick is going to create for people, suddenly they become much easier to compare. So that's a little bit about the changing emphasis around the projects and the comparisons between what was actually quite streamlined individual programs into a much wider pot. Right, our next slide is what I'm calling new old items. So there are now going to be some joint funding initiatives as well, working with organizations such as Nesta, the Architectural Heritage Fund. They're also going to be exploring social investment. The first one you can look at is the new loan fund called the Heritage Impact Fund by the Architectural Heritage Fund, of which the NLHF has contributed. And then in terms of major grants, and that is anything over £5 million. The current plan is to have that in 2 tranches over the course of the next 5 years, and we have a question later to discuss around that. But one of the interesting things that has come out, the sort of the new old items per se, is around Heritage Enterprise. Now, Heritage Enterprise is actually still on the docket, and I personally think this is a really good thing, and they've actually made some changes to the Heritage Enterprise program that I think are great in 2 ways. The first one being they have taken on board the fact that not commercial partners not being able to be the lead partner in the project can sometimes be off-putting for projects. So they are now allowing for commercial partners to be the lead partners as long as they are working in partnership with a not-for-profit organization. One of the other things that has come up, which I think is also incredibly useful, and I totally understand the reasoning for this, is they're now considering residential as part of the Heritage Enterprise Scheme. I think this is a great thing because, in fact, it's can really go to help Heritage respond to the housing crisis within the country, and it really does help us look at how do we make a sustainable future for some heritage buildings where residential is the most appropriate approach. A few more notable changes. We're going to have shorter turnaround times, which is wonderful news. We are going to have new guidance, shorter forms, and hallelujah, I think everyone will breathe a sigh of relief who's done it and used it before. They're going to have a whole new portal next year in 2020. So I think that is going to be a fantastic new way of working, and I'm very excited about that. I'm just going to talk a little bit through the grant summary and what the funder has been saying about turnaround times, various grant levels. There are sort of 4 levels at the moment, although the medium sort of encompasses 2. Small grants are 3,000 to 10,000, looking at single round applications, and that's being decided on by the head of team. There are no deadlines. There's an 8-week turnaround, and these projects can last 1 year in duration. The 2 levels of medium grants, 10,000 to 100,000, and then 100,000 to 250,000. Again, both single round applications. Anything under 100,000 is decided by the head of team. Anything over 100,000 to 250 is by the committee. If it's by committee, there are quarterly deadlines. It's an additional 4 weeks turnaround, and those projects can last a maximum of 5 years in duration. The large programs, 250,000 to 5 million. There is formally, it's a 2-stage application process, but that doesn't include the new expression of interest process, of which an expression of interest is something that you would put in looking to explore the funder's interest in your project. And then it's based on a sort of a traffic light system. You will be invited to come to the next stage and be given a lot of feedback on your project as you go along. So that's quite a significant change in terms of sort of gateways into the larger program. These are going to be decided upon at committee. Committee, as I mentioned earlier, in the areas are going to be dealing with all the grants up to 5 million. It's going to be on typical quarterly deadlines, 12-week turnaround with a maximum of 7 years. So 2 years for development, 5 years for delivery. So that's not much of a change there. Okay. And that's it, really. We're just coming into 11 o'clock. I have really sort of buzzed through this, and I hope that I haven't, just repeated what you already know. My opinions on this is the information that we know at this current time. Things are always going to be changing. This is a really different approach that the funder is taking. So there's going to be always going to be new things coming up. I suggest that you set up a Google alert for changes. Certainly go on the community portal on the National Lottery Heritage Fund website and join in the conversations there. That's a great way of keeping up to date with what's happening. And I'm very happy as well if you'd like to have a follow-up call about your own projects and get my thoughts on it. I'll be able to give you a bit more bespoke advice. I've given my phone number and my email address there on the screen if you'd like to note it down. But yeah, my overall my overall advice to everybody is focus on the people, focus on the difference that you're going to be making, really get to grips with the new evaluation guidance on the NLHF website. Evaluation and planning for change, such as using theory of change, or you might call it story of change. This is something that actually really needs to be taken into a lot of consideration. Evaluation is not something that you deal with after the project's finished, or at the start of the delivery phase. My best advice to you, and I'm happy to talk further about it, is let's talk about evaluation and planning for change at the very beginning of you thinking about your project. And I will guarantee you that you will have a much more successful project, be much more successful in your funding achievements, both with the National Lottery Heritage Fund, but also with other match funders, if you start to think about a people first approach and working backwards from the outcomes and difference you want to make, and then how your project fits in as an intervention, an activity in delivering that change. So I'm going to stop there, and I think we're going to hand over for some questions.
Hi everybody. Thank you, Sarah. That was absolutely fantastic and a really good insight into your own personal knowledge in what's the changes and what impact the changes are going to make, but also some really good takeaways for our viewers to think about when they're putting their own projects together. I do have a couple of questions. I don't know, Sarah, if you want to go back to the screen before, so that people, if they didn't take down your email address or your phone number, then while we're doing the question section, you mentioned earlier, you touched on it very briefly, the 5 million plus major award. Can you give us a bit more information about that?
Well, the answer is sort of yes and no. The major awards program is still very much in discussion. My understanding is that key stakeholders are being engaged on this in April and May, and that we're going to have more information probably in the early summertime. I think one of the things we can pontificate about is what that might mean in terms of £5 million awards, based upon the information that we've been told prior to this. We all know about some of the major problems with big projects that have happened in the last few years. People are probably very aware of some of the things that have been in the media. So I think personally the funder is right to be circumspect about major grants over 5 million. And certainly to be focusing on what is that added value that additional funding is going to bring. I personally have quite a bit of experience working on £5 million plus bids, from Alexandra Palace to Canterbury Cathedral to Hull, Yorkshire's Maritime City, and these are all exemplary projects, and we need to be really looking at why is the funder going to contribute over £5 million to a project that is it really that level of funding that is required. And I think that one of the things that we've been looking at internally at Tricolor, in partnership with some major architect partner and major project management partner, is looking at master planning or for organizations and long-term projects, multiple projects over a period of time, and how that process can be made much more people-centered, maybe much more friendly to ongoing investment by funders, by commercial partners as well. So yeah, if anyone would like to talk to me about master planning and how you take a project over £5 million and turn it into something that is at less risk of being turned down just because of the value, then do give me a call. Because yeah, I think whatever comes out in the major grants department, it's going to be not just highly competitive. We're all used to that, but I think it's going to be quite different, and I think it's going to be quite challenging. And I think we have to have a whole different concept on how we develop those projects and make an ask for something that big.
Okay, thank you for your answer for that. We've also had a couple of questions in advance of the webinar and during. The impact the changes will have on how much funding is available, or the 2019-2020 budget.
Yeah. So again, I'm not the funder. I never want to speak on their behalf, but I think what's critical to think about is that it has been announced that they have 1.2 billion over the course of the 5 years. So if we were going to break it down over those 5 years, you might be looking at 200, 220, 250 million pounds per year. I think that's what we're going to be looking at for this year. And whilst that is an improvement on last year, it's still almost half of what that was in 2013. And, that is not something that's going to change over the next 5 years. So, competition is still going to be incredibly high, and it's all about how your project is going to be set apart from the others. And again, it comes back, put people first, put change first. Think about your project and the things that you want to do with your organization as a means to an end, and it's just part of the activity that is going to deliver difference in your community. So yeah, I think we're probably going to be looking at around the between 200 million to 20, maybe a bit more, maybe a bit less.
Okay, thank you so much. If any of you listening do have any questions, like I said at the beginning, it's just the speech bubble box in your control panel on the right to send them through. They'll come in. If there's any that we don't get around to during this, then we will try and get them answered after the session. Obviously, Sarah's details are on the screen now, so you can, of course, get in touch with Sarah directly. I do have one more question. Again, this came in from a registrant before. Do you have any advice for match funding managers of 2019 lottery fund allocations?
Match funding managers. Well, I suppose it depends on what we mean by that. Do you have any advice on gaining match funding? Or is it, are you a manager of a potential match funder? Going from, if your responsibility is developing match funding for an organization or project, then my advice to you is start with the match funding first. One of the things that I have learned over the course of doing these projects for me is that many projects fail because they go to the lottery first, are successful in achieving a development grant, but have such a huge match funding requirement to raise over 2 years that it's almost impossible for them to achieve it, particularly without local authority support, underwriting, etc. On that note, I think it's really, really important that that local authorities have skin in the game, as they say. That's quite difficult, particularly when there are individual competing projects within different local authority areas. But if you are a local authority listening, I think it's really valuable that you start to work in joint partnership with projects who may be having individual conversations with you and act as a facilitator on bringing those projects together and how funding can be shared, how support can be shared between them. And in terms of the sort of other elements of match funding, you might be looking at a 10-year campaign to raise, several millions of pounds of match funding. So it really is about trying to think about when is the right time to be going to the National Lottery Heritage Fund versus other major funders as well. If you are asking this question from the perspective of you are a manager of a other funder, then obviously my main advice to you is start talking with the Heritage Fund as much as you possibly can. I think that there is a lot of joint work, a lot of outcomes that everyone is actually trying to achieve, and I think one of the the biggest issues when it comes to sort of crises moments in projects is, oh, we've got to do all of this in 8 weeks because of the needs of another funder. And my attitude to that is, let's talk, because actually the funder is not funding things just because of a deadline. They're funding it because they want to achieve outcomes, and they likely want to achieve similar, if not the same, outcomes. So it's not going to do anyone any good to not fund a project because of deadline issues. And my opinion is, while some things might be totally insurmountable, many things aren't, with a good conversation going. And that holds true for, all funders, but particularly for the National Lottery Heritage Fund. Talk to them, talk to them, talk to them. They're there, asking questions. None of them are silly. You will not be judged or have your grant put at risk by having conversations with your grant officer. I really, really encourage that. Whether you're working with a ROS consultant, that's a register of support services. Used to be the mentors and monitors. They're called consultants now. If you're working with them, you're working with your grants officer. Just talk to them. Make sure that you are communicating. This shows that you are an agile and responsible organization, and you've got your head on your shoulders about this is the reality, and I couldn't encourage that more.
Great, thank you for that. We've also had a couple of questions. Now, you've covered it on one of your slides, so I guess this question is, would you be happy to share the slide that explains the timetables for funding decisions and release of funding and all that? Because we've had a couple of questions regarding that, and that one slide you had that broke down the different categories of levels absolutely. Of funding. That would be fantastic.
Absolutely. I'm happy to share the whole slide deck.
That's great. That's perfect. Well, we're coming up to the close now. I do have one more question. You did touch on it earlier, but for the purpose of the person that sent this question in, they might have missed it at the beginning. Why has the National Lottery Heritage Fund moved towards funding more natural heritage projects when there are other sources of lottery funding already available for these?
Well, the short answer to that is it's based upon the consultation that they undertook. Focusing on natural heritage and community heritage is what actually people, grant recipients, stakeholders, general public felt that we actually needed to focus our attention on the most. This is set against a background of the huge reduction in biodiversity in the country, the impact of climate change, and this has been seen as a priority area. Now, as I said earlier, it's not just about we're funding parks or we're funding landscapes. It's about how do you incorporate natural heritage, but also limiting your impact of your project or improving your access to nature, the impact on nature that your project has. So, really consider, if you're, what can be done. If you're building a new museum, is there a grass roof option? Is there natural rainwater drainage incorporated? Really explore the needs of that. One of the things that I've seen quite a lot is projects that go in and get funded saying we're going to be BREEAM rated, which is one of the top levels of sort of environmentally sustainable building, and then by the end of the development phase, they say, actually, we can't be BREEAM rated because it costs a lot more money. I really, really recommend that you don't go down this route anymore and suddenly go from a project that was going to be incredibly environmentally sustainable to, we can't afford it now in development phase. Get that kind of stuff sorted before you put your applications in. You need to be in development phase improving your project, not making it worse. And that is, that's a key issue. So think about the environment and build it in to your project from the beginning. And that's what they mean from, our focus is on nature. It's about how is our project going to make our country a better place to live, not just for now, but for the future. How are you going to be, in building in carbon carbon neutrality? How are you going to work to discourage people from driving to your project or to your site afterwards? How are you going to continue maintaining your site in terms of plastics, in terms of what you are going to have in your cafe? Think about those different higher level social, environmental, health, community outcomes that actually, we're all trying to achieve in a way that's going to make our country, our community, our families, our neighbors more sustainable, and, a better place to be in 25, 50 years' time.
Fantastic. Thank you for expanding on that, Sarah.
Okay.
Well, I think we've reached the end of today's webinar. I would just like to say thank you so much, Sarah, for taking time out to talk us through the changes and the impact those changes could have on the organisations. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for being a part of it. Like I said, Sarah has very kindly said that she'll make her slide deck available, and we will also make this recording available. So everyone that has registered will receive an email from us. Look out for future webinars run by Museums and Heritage Advisor, and we hope to see you back here again soon. Thank you all so much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.